So I started filming these little videos on YouTube a couple years ago that were mostly like discussions I've been having, maybe with my son or my helper Joe at the body shop, or maybe some young men I had bumped into at a parking lot when they were pushing carts around. And I was trying to use some of the things that I've learned about philosophy and psychology to offer some ways for young men to look at some perspectives in their lives. Some different ways to look at the problems, and I didn't want to give them any specific advice, but rather give them several different ways to look at their situations and, draw their own conclusions as to what actions they should take to better themselves and their situations, whatever they were going through in their lives. So, I don't know, for 15, 20 years, and even before to some extent, I've read a lot of philosophy and psychology books and listened to so many lectures from college professors, university professors about philosophy and psychology as an effort to better understand myself. So what I'm doing with these videos is not to give advice to anybody, to tell anybody how to live their life. Oh, if you live your life this way, you'll be happy. That's not what I'm doing at all. What I'm trying to do is just, so I'm not going to be moralizing or anything. What I'm hoping to offer you is some understanding and insights into how we comprehend our inner lives, our inner worlds, and also the inner lives of the people around us, the people we love, or the people that we're forced to spend time with at work or whatever, and why they might act the way they do and think the things they think. Now, I've had a lot of struggles in my life that I've overcome, and I'll be using myself as an example a lot of times. I'm going to be completely frank and honest and open, and I don't know, I'll kind of be an open book that you can read if you want. So, anyway, let me start by talking about how I understand myself as a self, right? How I see who I am, how I view myself as a being, out in the world, interacting with other beings. So, how do we view ourselves as a self? So now the common view, going back, pre-Socratic times, even the Greeks, we kind of viewed ourselves as a body and a soul. And you can see that through Christian times and other religions, with our soul acting as our governor, as our control over our body. Today we have a more secular view of this. So we say we have a body and a mind, or an ego consciousness, right, our mind. And we say that our ego consciousness is the governor of our body. So it's like the mind is the master of the body. But I tend to have a very different view, almost an opposite view. For me, I see the body as reigning supreme, and the mind is simply one of the many parts of the body and doing one of the many functions of the body. I mean, I have a central nervous system, that my body, gives me all sorts of information from. I have digestive system, all these systems. Now, obviously, my consciousness is the most important of these functions, but it's all these functions are serving the body instead of, the body serving the mind. All these functions are serving my body is kind of what my view is. So what emerges from this line of thought is not the image of a self as a kind of a single unity, but more as a multiplicity, right? A multivaried view of the self. So all the various drives within myself are not in any sense identical. I have many different drives, and they're not all working for the same goals, right? I have impulses, desires that are all working at the same time, And there are these wills, right? My different wills, they're all competing inside. You know, I have the will to eat, the will to have sex, the will to succeed, you know, all sorts of desires and needs that I want to satisfy. And a lot of times they can come into conflict with each other. They compete with each other. So I see this myself as a totality of all my various wills, you know, many of which oppose each other, you know? So how do I control all these drives or all these wills, or how do any of us, you know, exert some self-control over these wills that make up the self? I mean, how do we go about having self-control? Now, that's kind of what today's On Deck is about, self-control, and how we regulate all these drives, these dynamic wills that are trying to get what they want, and how sometimes we go to war with ourselves to try to control these various desires, right? So let's think about willpower. Let's say we made a New Year's resolution to go to the gym and lose some weight, right? We tell our friends we're going to lose 20 pounds. I'm going to the gym 3 times a week. Man, I'm going to eat healthy. I'm going to, you know, I'm doing this, man. I've made this decision. This is what I'm doing, right? But often what happens after a month, right? It's really hard, you know, and then we give up, and, you know, we start going back to our old ways, eating unhealthy, not exercising, right? So in the case of a person like this, we might say, well, they didn't have enough willpower. They didn't have enough self-control. And so it's hard, because it's like we're the shepherd and the flock at the same time, right? So we have to lead our flock as the shepherd, but we're also the flock who needs a shepherd to lead us. So, you know, it's not an easy thing. So, you know, a person in this situation, whether they're struggling with getting healthy or with drugs or alcohol, this person is in conflict with themselves, right? So we want one of our impulses, the impulse to be healthy and make good choices, and that's set against the impulse to indulge our appetites, even if it's not good for us in the long run, because in the short term, you gratify this impulse you have, which is to enjoy yourself eating some food or whatever it is, you know? So, so willpower to make the desire win. So that's why I view myself as a multiplicity, you know? Because if my ego was in charge, right? If my mind was completely in charge of my body and everything, it would be no problem. I would never get into temptation. I would say, I'm not smoking anymore, right? Well, obviously, I have this other drive that wants to smoke, right? So I have to battle against that. So that's why I view myself as a multiplicity instead of like a singularity where my mind, because obviously, to me, obviously, that can't be. Because if our mind was in complete control, we would never give in to any temptations whatsoever. And obviously, we give in to a lot of temptations. So what are the ways we use to increase our willpower and control all these drives to attain our desires, our wants and our needs, because each one of these wants and needs wants to be satiated. So one of the ways we go about exerting self-control is removing ourselves from these temptations, right? So let's start by looking at the extreme. So that'd be an alcoholic who is so can't control, has no self-control over drinking, and has to go away to rehab. He has to totally isolate himself from all alcohol, just be locked away with people making sure he doesn't get alcohol, right? So that would be the extreme version of avoiding all temptation, right? So to lesser degrees, how do we do this? Well, we might say, I'm only going to drink on the weekends, right? Go out with my buddies, socially acceptable, go out for some drinks. But if I drink Monday through Friday during the week, well, that's degenerate. That's a horrible choice. So I'll just drink on the weekends. So that's a way to exert self-control on your drinking. Another way to exert self-control on your drinking is you might say, I only drink beer or wine. I don't drink any hard alcohol. You know, that's another way to try to regulate, you know, your drinking. So, but what happens when large numbers of people can't exert self-control over substances, for instance. So let's look at prohibition in America. Why did we have prohibition in America? How did that pass? Was it because a bunch of church-going moralizers just wanted to take our fun away from us and, you need to live by the Bible, no alcohol? No, that's not why we came about prohibition. So before prohibition, all our drinking was like very social. You'd go to the pub and have beers, and you would buy rounds of beers for your friends, and then you would all toast and cheer and drink together, and then you would go home, right? It was just beer and wine, not a lot of alcohol content. Well, what suddenly happened? Well, all of a sudden you had all this moonshine, 180 proof, almost pure alcohol come on. And now all of a sudden men are drinking alone. And they're drinking every day. And they're getting wasted drunk. They're beating their wives. They're not providing for their children. Companies can't function because they don't have enough workers. It was like an epidemic, like our meth epidemic today, or our opioid crisis that we had that wiped out vast parts of Appalachia. Same thing. I mean, it was such an epidemic, it was even bigger problem than those problems, right? So women got together and were like, we're getting beat by our drunk husbands, or they're not providing for us. We have to stop this. These people cannot control their use over alcohol. And so that's why we had prohibition, right? So let's look at, okay, so another way, we're talking about avoiding all temptation. Look what the Muslims do to avoid temptation, right? So let's look at some of the Shias. They have all these rules of like no alcohol at all, right, to avoid the temptation. And in a lot of these harder line Muslims, as they get harder and harder lines, you have total bans against drinking where they're punishable by maybe, fines if you get caught with alcohol, or maybe some jail time. Or in some of these really extreme parts of the Middle East, you could get punished to death for drinking if you keep doing it over and over again, right? So look how they're trying to remove the temptation so that you can't sin by drinking. Why do you think they cover their women from head to toe and only have slots for their eyes? They're trying to remove all male temptation for their sexual desires, because the Muslims assume, well, men can't control their sexual desires, so we need to remove the temptation, and then there won't be any sinning. They won't be tempted. They won't even know what a woman looks like. And when they have a wife, they can't compare their wife to another wife. When you're out on the street, you can't go, wow, that woman's really pretty, because you don't even know what they look like. How can you even compare your wife to anybody else? So you're taking all this temptation is what they're trying to do. I mean, to me, that's not going to work, but that's what they do. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to, say that men can't, have any self-control. So this is how we fix it, right? So that's one of the ways that we remove temptation from our lives, and how it can affect us, society, when people can't exert self-control. So we avoid occasions for satisfying the impulse and weakening that impulse by ever-lengthening periods away from it. That's one way you might be able to, avoid temptations. So another way to exert control is by, having, a regular pattern, a routine. And you fulfill that impulse, on certain timelines. So, you can see this with cultural conventions with, all right, eating, right? So we have a cultural convention. You eat at 7 a.m. breakfast, then you eat at 12 o'clock for lunch, and then you eat at 6 o'clock for dinner. Because, that way you can regulate and control your appetite, make sure you're not eating too much. You're doing it at regular times. So they're setting patterns to help us exert, we set patterns to help ourselves exert self-control. I know in my own life, I love a routine. I mean, I love the same things over and over, right? I mean, I worked at Sanford Auto Body for 35 years straight. I met my wife at 15, and I come home to her every single day, and I love that. I love routine. Now, also part of my routine is making sure I add time for, going out there, doing some wild, fun stuff, too. I got to make sure I put that in my routine, I go out and do some spontaneous things, and go out and have a good time. So there's lots of routines. I mean, look at what we do on a society level, right? We have the 40-hour work week. You work Monday through Friday, and the weekends are off. And, rinse, wash, and repeat. That's a way to help us exert self-control. We set up routines. So another way to dampen our desires is to use mental tricks on ourselves by imagining horrible outcomes if we were trying to satiate that need. So like, say I was having a desire to go out and snort a whole shitload of coke, right? Just stay up for 24 hours in a constant state of euphoria and just, snort coke and get all that dopamine in the head and, hang out with some other coke heads and, and have this great 24 hours. But, so what I'll do is I'll think about all the bad outcomes if I make that decision, right? So I'll imagine how mad my wife's going to be or what it might do to my job, that kind of stuff, as a way to exert self-control of myself, Now, I'm an atheist, but like religious people, they might imagine themselves going to hell for, for doing bad stuff. It's a very common way for people to combat desires. People, you form common associations with these thoughts, so often that, for example, now, when I think about cocaine, instantly I'm just repulsed. I'm like, ugh, I want nothing to do with it because I've made these associations in my mind that cocaine is bad. So even if it pops up, if I hear about it, it's instantly, instead of like, oh, that'd be kind of nice to do it, it's like, no. So, I've made this connection that cocaine is not good. Even it's not worth the short-term gratification. And it's an automatic. It's so that's the real trick of this method of self-control. In society, we see this in people who do church mantras to keep the bad impulses away. Muslims have this thing where they talk about, oh, you could die at any time, so don't sin, because if you die while you're sinning, you're going to bring great shame to yourself and your family. So lastly, we might, supplement ourselves in order to get some self-control, to keep unwanted desires to get a hold of me. So I might throw myself into work. A lot of people say I'm a workaholic, but I really don't like that word, don't like that to describe myself because it has a negative connotation to it. So for me, being a workaholic, if that's what it's a huge positive in my life. Even on the weekends, I'm always throwing myself into projects to keep myself distracted and keep these other impulses kind of at bay. It's a way I use self-control. So I'm always, fixing the house up, maintaining it, maintaining the cars, building the deck I'm sitting on, all the stuff I fix up. I was an avid road bicyclist for 15 years. I rode my bicycle back and forth to work every day. I rode all over, 250 days a year, 5,000 miles a year after year, because I liked that, it just kind of kept me in check. It kept those impulses in check, How much time do I got here? Not much.